Sections. The sun was a white disk burning through the haze when Jacob Marsh rode into the canyon alone. The air shimmered above the red rock walls, and the only sound was the rhythmic creak of saddle leather and the soft fall of his horse's hooves on the dust. He had been riding fence line for 3 days, checking the boundaries of land that stretched so far a man could ride from dawn to dusk and still see his own markers on the horizon. The work was solitary, and he preferred it that way. Words had stopped meaning much to him after Sarah died. The fever had taken her in the winter of 1873, and he had buried her on the hill behind the ranch house under a cottonwood tree that she had loved. That was 4 years ago, and 4 years of silence and work and the slow erosion of everything soft inside him, until all that remained was function and routine. He was checking the northern boundary, where his land pressed against the open range, when he heard the shots. 3 cracks echoing off the canyon walls, followed by the thunder of hooves and men shouting. He reined his horse to a stop and listened. The sounds came from the narrow draw to the east. He touched his rifle in its scabbard and considered riding the other direction. Whatever trouble was happening in that draw was not his concern. He had learned to keep his head down and his business to himself. The frontier rewarded men who minded their own affairs and punished those who interfered. But the shouts continued, and there was something in them that made his jaw tighten. He heard laughter, the kind of laughter that came from men who had cornered something weaker than themselves. Sections. He turned his horse toward the sound. Sections. The draw opened into a small basin ringed with juniper and sage. 3 men on horseback had circled a figure on foot. Jacob recognized 2 of them. Clay Hendricks and his brother Paul, who worked for the big cattle operation to the north. The 3rd man he did not know. The figure on foot was a woman. She was backed against a boulder with nowhere to run. Her clothing was dark leather, and her long black hair hung loose past her shoulders. She held a knife in one hand. Not a steel blade, but something carved from bone or antler. The blade caught the light as she shifted her stance, but her face was calm, but her eyes tracked the riders with the focused intensity of a hunted animal that knows it has one chance left. Sections Clay Hendricks was grinning. He had his rifle across his saddle, but pointed down. This was sport to him, not a fight. "Put the knife down, squaw," he called out. "We just want to talk to you." "Frau." The woman said nothing. She adjusted her grip on the knife. Prefer Paul Hendricks laughed. "She don't speak English, Clay. Probably don't even know what you're saying." "Perbaschen. Then we'll have to teach her," Clay said. He nudged his horse forward. Porper Jacob rode into the basin at a walk. His rifle stayed in its scabbard, but his hand rested on his thigh close to it. "That's far enough," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. "Power." All 3 men turned. Clay's grin widened. "Well, if it ain't the Widow Marsh. You didn't know you came this far north." "I'm checking my fence line," Jacob said. "This is still my land for another 1/4 mile." "Your land," Clay repeated. He looked at his brother and the 3rd man. "You hear that? He says this is his land." He turned back to Jacob. "We found her on open range. That makes her anybody's business." "Perbauer." "She ain't business," Jacob said. "She's a person, and you're gonna ride out of here and leave her be." Parr. The 3rd man spat into the dust. "You got no say in this, Marsh. There's 3 of us and 1 of you." Baichor, Jacob looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the woman. She was watching him now. Her knife was still raised, but her posture had changed slightly. She was assessing him the same way she had assessed the other men, measuring threat and intent. He met her eyes and then looked back at Clay. "I'm not asking," he said. Pechurum. Clay's grin faded. His hand moved toward his rifle. You're making a mistake, Pechurum. Jacob's hand was already on his revolver. He did not draw it, but the movement was enough. Clay froze. The silence stretched out. A hawk circled overhead, and its shadow passed across the red earth. Finally, Clay straightened in his saddle. This ain't worth it, he muttered. He looked at the woman. You got lucky today. He wheeled his horse, and the other two followed. They rode out of the basin at a canter, and their hoofbeats faded into the distance. Poor Jacob waited until they were gone. Then he looked at the woman. She had not moved. The knife was still in her hand. He slowly took his hand away from his revolver and held both hands up where she could see them. I'm not gonna hurt you, he said. He did not know if she understood, but he said it anyway. You're safe now. Pierre Croix. She watched him. Her eyes were dark and unreadable. Then she lowered the knife. Not all the way, just enough to show she was listening. He dismounted slowly. His boots hit the ground, and he stood there letting her look at him. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders and weathered by sun and wind. His hands were scarred from years of ranch work, and his face was lined at the corners of his eyes. He was 38 years old, but looked older. He gestured to his horse. You need water? He asked. He reached for his canteen and held it out. Pepper. She did not move toward him, but she tilted her head slightly. Considering. Pour. He set the canteen on a flat rock halfway between them. Then he stepped back. She waited another moment. Then she moved forward quickly and took the canteen. She drank without taking her eyes off him. When she was finished, she set the canteen back on the rock and retreated to her original position. The knife was lower now, not a threat, just a tool held ready. Parvar. Jacob picked up the canteen and hung it back on his saddle. He looked at the sun. It was past noon. You got somewhere to go? He asked. He pointed north. Town's that way, about 8 miles. He pointed south. My ranch is that way. 4 miles. He waited. She said nothing. He rubbed the back of his neck. Talking to someone who could not answer felt strange after so much silence. Those men might come back, he said. It ain't safe out here alone. Petrau. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at his horse. Then back at him. She made a gesture with her free hand, a cutting motion across her forearm. Then she pointed at him. Sections. He frowned. He did not understand. She repeated the gesture more slowly. Then she pointed at his left side. He looked down. His shirt was dark with sweat, but there was something else, a wetness that was spreading. He touched his side, and his hand came away red. He stared at it. He had not felt the bullet. The adrenaline had masked it. But now that he saw the blood, he felt the pain arrive all at once, a hot burning that made his breath catch. Vertuchera, hell, he said quietly. Vertro. His knees buckled. The woman moved fast. She caught his arm and guided him down to the ground before he could fall. Her hands were strong and sure. She eased him onto his back and then knelt beside him. She said something in her own language. The words were soft and rhythmic. She pulled his shirt up and examined the wound. Her fingers pressed around the entry point, and he hissed through his teeth. She looked at his face, and then back at the wound. She said something else. A question, maybe. He did not know. She stood and moved to his horse. She went through his saddlebags with quick, efficient movements. She found his bedroll and a spare shirt. She brought them back and spread the bedroll on the ground beside him. Then she gestured for him to roll onto it. He did. The movement sent a spike of pain through his side that made his vision blur. When it cleared, she was cutting his shirt away with her bone knife. The blade was sharp. It sliced through the fabric like it was paper. Par. She examined the wound again. Then she looked at him and held up 2 fingers. She pointed at the wound and then at her knife. He understood. The bullet was still inside. She was going to cut it out. He nodded. She watched his face to make sure he understood. Then she built a small fire. Paror. He lay there watching her work. She moved with absolute certainty. She gathered dry sage and juniper bark and struck sparks with a piece of flint and steel she carried in a pouch at her belt. The fire caught and she fed it carefully until it burned hot. She held the blade of her knife in the flames. While she waited, she took a leather cord from around her neck. A small bundle of dried herbs hung from it. She opened the bundle and selected several leaves. She chewed them into a paste and then held the paste out to him. He opened his mouth and she placed it on his tongue. It was bitter and made his mouth go numb almost immediately. Sections. She tested the knife blade against her thumb. Satisfied, she moved back to his side. She said something in her language. The tone was gentle, reassuring. Then she cut. Paltrer. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. The numbness from the herbs took the edge off, but it was still like being branded. He gritted his teeth and focused on breathing. She worked quickly. Her hands were steady. She widened the wound and then slipped 2 fingers inside. He felt her searching, felt the pressure and the wrongness of it. Then she found the bullet. She worked it free and held it up for him to see. A flattened piece of lead. She tossed it aside and immediately pressed a wad of cloth against the wound. She held pressure for a long time. When the bleeding slowed, she packed the wound with more of the chewed herbs. Then she bound it tightly with strips torn from his spare shirt. Sections. When she was finished, she sat back on her heels. Her hands were covered in his blood. She wiped them on the grass and then looked at him. He was pale and sweating, but conscious. "Thank you," he managed. His voice was hoarse. "Paitbroer." She tilted her head. She did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. She nodded once. Then she stood and walked to the edge of the basin. She stood there, looking out at the land. He watched her. The sun was lower now, and the light had turned golden. It caught in her hair and outlined her figure against the sky. She was young, maybe 25. Her face was angular and strong, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness. She looked like the land itself, carved by wind and sun and hardship into something that could endure. She came back and checked his bandage. Then she looked at his horse. She gestured to it and then to him. A question. He understood. Could he ride? He did not know, but he knew he could not stay here. "I can try," he said. Proper. She helped him to his feet. The world tilted, and he grabbed her shoulder to steady himself. She braced under his weight without flinching. Together they got him to his horse. Getting into the saddle was agony, but he managed it. She handed him the reins. Then she looked up at him, waiting. "My ranch," he said. He pointed south. 4 miles. You should come with me." He held out his hand. She looked at his hand, then at his face, then at the horizon. She was deciding. He could see it. She could walk away right now, disappear into the canyons, and he would never see her again. Or she could trust him. A stranger, a white man, someone who, by all rights, she should fear. Peachorao. She took his hand. Her grip was strong and warm. He pulled her up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back and wrapped her arms around his waist to steady him. Her body was solid against his. He could feel her breathing. "Hold on," he said. He turned the horse south, and they rode toward his ranch. Pirauer. The ride took over an hour. He faded in and out. The pain and the blood loss made everything feel distant and unreal. But every time he started to slip sideways, her arms tightened around him. She kept him upright, kept him in the saddle. When they finally reached the ranch house, the sun was setting. The sky was streaked with red and orange. His dog came running from the barn, a big German shepherd named Buck. The dog barked once and then circled the horse. He could smell the blood. Baparamar. She helped him down from the saddle. His legs barely held him. She got under his arm and walked him to the house. Buck followed. Inside the house was dim and spare. A single room with a fireplace and a table and a bed in the corner. Everything was clean, but there was no warmth to it, no color, no life. She guided him to the bed, and he collapsed onto it. She immediately went to work. She found his lamp and lit it. She found a basin and filled it with water from the pitcher on the table. She brought both to the bedside and checked his bandage. It was soaked through. She cut it away and cleaned the wound again. Then she rebandaged it with fresh cloth torn from a sheet she found in a trunk, made sections. When she was satisfied he would not bleed out, she covered him with a blanket. Then she stepped back and looked around the room. Buck sat at her feet. The dog was watching her with his head tilted. She crouched down and held out her hand. Buck sniffed it. Then he licked her fingers. She scratched behind his ears and the dog's tail wagged. She stood and walked through the house. She opened the door to the second room. It was empty except for a cradle in the corner and a rocking chair. Dust covered everything. She closed the door quietly. She went outside. He heard her moving around, heard the pump handle squeak as she drew water, heard her talking softly to Buck. When she came back in, she had washed the blood from her hands and arms. She had also found his store of dried meat and hardtack. She placed a piece of hardtack and some jerky on a plate and set it on the table. Then she sat down in the chair by the fireplace and waited. He woke in the night. The room was dark except for the faint glow of embers in the fireplace. He was burning up. Fever had set in. He tried to sit up and could not. A moment later she was there. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. She lifted his head and held a cup to his lips. Water. He drank. She eased him back down and checked his bandage. Then she sat beside the bed and kept watch. The fever lasted 3 days. He drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, he saw her moving through the house. She kept the fire going. She changed his bandages. She made broths from the dried vegetables she found in his pantry and spooned them into his mouth. And she washed him when the fever made him sweat through his clothes. She did all of this without speaking, without hesitation. Buck stayed close to her. The dog had chosen her, and that simple fact registered somewhere in Jacob's fevered mind as significant. Sections on the 4th day, the fever broke. He woke clear-headed for the first time. The room was bright with morning sun. She was sitting at the table grinding something with a stone. Herbs, maybe. She heard him stir and looked up. When she saw he was awake, she stood and came to the bed. She touched his forehead. Her hand was cool. She nodded to herself, satisfied. Then she brought him water and more broth. He drank both. When he was finished, he looked at her. "You saved my life," he said. "Twice now." She did not understand the words, but she understood he was thanking her. She nodded. Then she went back to her work. Sections over the next week he grew stronger. She helped him sit up, then stand, then walk a few steps. She was always there to catch him when his legs gave out. She changed his bandages twice a day, and the wound was healing clean. No infection, no rot. Whatever herbs she had used were working. He watched her move through his house. She had taken over the daily tasks without being asked. She swept the floor. She washed the dishes. She tended the fire. She cooked simple meals from his meager supplies. But she also did something else. She brought life back into the dead space. Sections one morning, he woke to find a bundle of wildflowers in a tin cup on the table. Yellow and purple blooms that she must have gathered from the creek. The splash of color against the rough wood was startling. He stared at them for a long time. The next day, she had arranged smooth river stones on the windowsill. The day after that, she hung a bundle of dried sage from a nail by the door. The scent filled the room. Small things. Simple things. But they transformed the space. His house had been a shelter. She was making it a home. But he started talking to her, even though she did not understand. It felt strange at first. His voice was rusty from years of silence. But she listened. She would pause in her work and look at him while he spoke. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle and the fence line and the creek that ran dry in summer. He told her about the winter when the snow had been so deep he could not leave the house for 2 weeks. He did not tell her about Sarah yet. That wound was still too raw. But he talked, and she listened, and something in the air between them began to shift. Sections 2 weeks after she had cut the bullet from his side, he was strong enough to walk outside. She stayed close as he made his way to the porch. Buck trotted ahead of them. The dog had become her shadow. Jacob lowered himself into the chair and looked out at his land. The ranch spread before him, the barn and the corral and the fields beyond, everything he had built with his own hands. She stood at the porch rail looking out at the same view. The wind moved her hair. She turned and looked at him. Then she pointed at the neglected garden plot beside the house. It was overgrown with weeds. Nothing had been planted there in 4 years. She looked at him and raised her eyebrows. A question. Pargetfro. He understood. You want to plant something, he asked. In sections. She waited. Sections. He nodded. Go ahead. Sections. The next day she began clearing the plot. She pulled weeds and turned the soil with a spade she found at the barn. She worked with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. Buck lay in the shade nearby watching her. Jacob sat on the porch and watched too. She moved with a rhythm that was almost meditative. When the plot was cleared, she walked to the creek. She came back with her hands full of plants. She transplanted them carefully. He did not recognize most of them. Wild herbs, maybe, things she knew from her own people. Within days, the plot was transformed. Green shoots pushed up through the dark earth. She watered them every morning and evening. Proparf, one evening as the sun was setting, she sat on the porch steps. He was in his chair. Buck was between them. She had been singing softly while she worked in the garden, a melody in her own language. The notes were haunting and beautiful. Now she was quiet. She looked out at the land turning gold in the fading light. He looked at her profile, at the strong line of her jaw and the way the light caught in her hair. He felt something shift in his chest, a loosening, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. I don't even know your name, he said quietly. She turned to look at him. He pointed at himself. Jacob, he said. My name is Jacob. He pointed at her and raised his eyebrows. Purr. She watched him. Then she pointed at herself. Ayana, she said. Her voice was low and clear. It was the first word she had spoken aloud in his presence. Why Perarv? He repeated it carefully. Ayana. Paravar. She nodded. Then she smiled. It was a small smile, but it changed her entire face. He found himself smiling back. Buck's tail thumped against the porch boards. Parker 4. The days took on a rhythm. He grew stronger. She continued to tend the house and the garden. They worked side by side. He mended tech and she ground herbs. He chopped wood and she cooked. They communicated through gestures and single words. She learned his name for things. Table, water, fire, horse. He learned a few of hers, though. His tongue stumbled over the sounds. They ate meals together at the table. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of presence and awareness. Later, one afternoon, he found her in the barn. She was working with his horse, the big roan gelding that had carried them both home. The horse was notoriously skittish. Jacob was the only one who could handle him, but Ayana stood at the horse's shoulder with her hand on its neck. She was murmuring to it in her own language. The horse's ears were forward, relaxed. She ran her hand down its leg, and the horse lifted its hoof without protest. She checked the hoof and cleaned it. Then she moved to the next leg. Jacob stood in the doorway watching. When she finished, she looked up and saw him. She was not startled. She simply nodded. "You're good with him," Jacob said. "He don't let most people touch him." Petrafrain. She patted the horse's shoulder. Then she walked past Jacob out of the barn. He followed. She went to the corral where his other 2 horses stood in the shade. She climbed the fence and dropped into the corral. The horses came to her. She touched their faces and they nuzzled her hands. He leaned against the fence and watched. She had a gift. Animals trusted her the way Buck trusted her, the way his skittish horse trusted her. It was something he recognized because animals had always trusted him too. It was one of the reasons he preferred their company to people. That night after supper, she did not go to the corner where she had been sleeping on a pallet of blankets. Instead, she sat by the fire. He sat in the chair across from her. Buck lay between them. The fire crackled and the room was warm. He had been thinking about something for days. Now he decided to say it. "Power. Those men from the canyon," he said. "They work for the big outfit north of here. They might come looking for you. Or for me." He paused. "It ain't safe for you to be here alone when I'm out working the ranch." She watched him, listening even though she could not understand all the words. "I want you to stay," he said. "But I need you to know it might bring trouble." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the corner where she kept her few possessions. She picked up her bone knife. She came back and sat down. She held the knife up so he could see it. Then she pointed at him. Then at herself. Then she made a gesture with her other hand, 2 fingers walking together, side by side. Parbeor. He understood. She was saying they would face the trouble together. For he nodded slowly. "All right then." Prar. She set the knife aside. Then she reached into the pouch at her belt and pulled out something small. She held it out to him. It was a carving, a small hawk made from a piece of pale wood. The detail was extraordinary. Every feather was visible. She had made it while he was recovering from the fever, and she had worked on it in the evenings by lamplight. He took it carefully. The wood was smooth and warm from her hand. "It's beautiful," he said. His voice was rough. She nodded. Then she pointed at him. "A gift for him." While he closed his hand around it. "Thank you, Param." She smiled. Then she said something in her own language. The words were soft. He did not understand them, but he felt their weight. She stood and went to her pallet in the corner. She lay down and pulled the blanket over herself. He sat by the fire for a long time, holding the carved hawk. Buck's head rested on his knee. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. The sound was like water. He had not felt this kind of peace in 4 years. Borom, the trouble came 3 weeks later. Jacob was in the north pasture, checking on the cattle when he saw the dust. 3 riders coming fast. He recognized them before they got close. Clay Hendricks and his brother Paul and the third man from the canyon. They reined up 20 feet away. Clay was not grinning now. His face was hard. "We got business with you, Marsh," Clay said. Jacob sat easy in his saddle. His rifle was in its scabbard. "What business would that be?" "Pervar, you got something that don't belong to you." "Pervar, I got a lot of things. You'll have to be more specific." Pervar's Paul Hendricks spat. "Don't play stupid. The squaw. We saw her in town last week. She was with you." Pervar. Jacob's jaw tightened. Ayanna had ridden into town with him to get supplies. She had stayed close to his side the whole time. The stares and whispers had followed them everywhere. But she had held her head high. She had not flinched. "Her name is Ayanna," Jacob said, "and she ain't property. She's free to go where she wants." "She's a damn Indian," Clay said. "She don't belong here, and you don't got no right harboring her." "Sections, I got every right. She's on my land. She's under my protection, and you ain't got any claim to her." Sections. Clay leaned forward in his saddle. "People are talking Marsh. They're saying you've gone soft in the head. Living out here with a savage. It ain't right. It ain't Christian." Pray for. Jacob's voice went cold. "What I do on my land is my business. Now get off my property before I make you." Pray for. The third man laughed. "You in what army?" "Mar. Just me," Jacob said. His hand moved to his rifle. "But I only need 1 shot per man, and there's 3 of you. You do the math." Peachbrow. Clay's face flushed red. "This ain't over, Marsh. The boss wants her gone. Says she's stirring up trouble. Says the other Indians might get ideas if they see one of their own living comfortable with a white man. He's talking to the sheriff about it." "Let him talk," Jacob said. "She ain't breaking any laws." "Maybe not yet," Clay said, "but laws can change." He wheeled his horse. "You been warned." The 3 men rode off. Power. Jacob sat there watching them go. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. He turned his horse and rode hard back to the ranch. When he got there, Ayanna was in the garden. She looked up and saw his face. She stood immediately. Buck was at her side, and the dog's hackles were up. He could sense Jacob's tension. Tiburmar, Jacob dismounted. "They came," he said. "The men from the canyon. They're making threats." Baror. She watched him, waiting. Sections. He walked to her. "They want you gone. They're going to try to use the law against us." He stopped in front of her. "I won't let them take you. You understand? I won't let them." Proper, she looked up at him. Then she reached out and placed her hand on his chest. Over his heart, she said something in her own language. The words were quiet but firm. Then she said in careful English, "I stay." Ptitrau. He stared at her. It was the first time she had spoken English to him. The words were simple, but they hit him like a physical blow. "You stay," he repeated. "Parpamar." She nodded. "I stay." Parpamar. He covered her hand with his. "Then we'll fight them together." Burbao. That night he could not sleep. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. Ayanna was on her pallet in the corner. He could hear her breathing, soft and steady. He thought about Sarah. about the life they had planned and the children they never had, about the empty cradle in the other room. He had loved Sarah, but that love had been built on shared history and common ground. They had spoken the same language, shared the same world. What he felt for Ayanna was different. It had been built in silence, built through actions and presence and the slow accumulation of trust. It was a love that had grown in the cracks of his grief without him noticing until it was already rooted deep. He got up and walked to the window. The moon was full. The land was silver and black. He heard her move. She came to stand beside him. She looked out at the same view. Then she looked at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes were serious. She spoke in her own language, a long sentence, and he did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was telling him her story, who she was, where she came from, what she had lost. Parpro. When she finished, he spoke. My wife died, he said quietly. 4 years ago. Her name was Sarah. We were going to have a baby, but she lost it. Then she got sick. I couldn't save her. His voice cracked. I couldn't save either of them. Pardon. Ayanna reached up and touched his face. Her fingers traced the lines around his eyes, the grief carved there. She said something soft. Then she said in English, You saved me. Pataparast. He closed his eyes. You saved me first. Parparastra, she smiled. Then she took his hand and placed it over her heart. He could feel it beating, strong and steady. She placed her other hand over his heart. They stood like that, and two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their separate griefs. Two people who had built something new in the silence. Sections. The sheriff came the following week. Jacob was expecting him. He met him at the property line. The sheriff was an older man named Tom Garrett. He had been sheriff for 15 years. He was not a bad man, but he was a practical one. He enforced the law as it was written, not as it should be. Jacob, Garrett said. He tipped his hat. Tom, I'm here on official business. There's been complaints. Barbara 4. I figured. Barbara. The Hendricks outfit says you're harboring an Indian woman. Says she's causing trouble. But Barbara, she ain't causing any trouble. She's living on my land, working my ranch. That ain't illegal. Pure. Garrett shifted in his saddle. No, it ain't. But there's talk of bringing in a federal marshal. They're saying she might be from a reservation, that she might have run off. If that's true, then technically she's government property, and they got the right to take her back. Paragraph 4. Jacob's hands tightened on his reins. She ain't property, and she ain't from any reservation. She's a free woman. So you got proof of that? Yeah, I got her word. Pop 4. Garrett sighed. Jacob, that ain't gonna hold up if they push this. You know that. Pete. Then what do you suggest? Pete. Garrett looked uncomfortable. Marry her. If she's your wife, then she's got legal standing. They can't touch her. Jacob stared at him. Marry her. It's the only way I can see to protect her under the law. Otherwise, if the marshal comes, I'll have to let him take her. And I don't want to do that, Jacob. I know you're a good man, but my hands are tied. Sections Garrett rode away. Jacob sat there for a long time. Then he turned his horse and rode back to the ranch. Ayanna was hanging laundry on the line. She looked up when she heard him coming. He dismounted and walked to her. We need to talk, he said. She set down the wet shirt she was holding. She followed him to the porch. They sat on the steps. Buck lay at their feet. Jacob looked out at the land. Then he looked at her. The sheriff says they might send a federal marshal. They're going to try to claim your reservation property, that you ran away. Perpro. She listened. Her face was still, but he could see the fear in her eyes. "Pripro, there's a way to stop them," he said. "If you're my wife, legally, then they can't take you." He paused. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, not because I'm trying to own you, but because it's the only way I know to keep you safe." Prior. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said in careful English, "You want me stay?" "Yes." "You want me be your wife?" He nodded. "Yes, but only if you want it too. I ain't gonna force you into anything." She reached out and took his hand. She looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and weathered, hers strong and brown. Then she looked up at him. "I want stay," she said. "I want be with you." "Then we'll do it," he said. "We'll go to town tomorrow. We'll make it legal." She nodded. Then she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. They sat like that, breathing together. Buck's tail thumped against the porch boards. Sections. They rode into town the next morning. Ayanna wore a dress she had made from fabric he had bought her. It was simple but beautiful, dark blue with red embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was braided, and she wore a necklace of carved beads. She looked like herself, not trying to be something she was not. Just herself, and she was beautiful. Freitzafro. The town watched them ride in. People stopped on the boardwalk to stare. Whispers followed them. Jacob kept his eyes forward. Ayanna rode beside him with her head high. They went to the church. The preacher was a thin man named Reverend Hayes. He looked uncomfortable when Jacob explained what they wanted. "This is highly irregular," Hayes said. "Is it legal?" Jacob asked. "Well, yes, but then do it." Hayes performed the ceremony in the empty church. There were no witnesses except Buck, who they had tied outside. The vows were simple. Jacob spoke his clearly. Ayanna repeated hers in careful English. When Hayes pronounced them married, Jacob took her hand. He did not kiss her. Not there. Not in front of the preacher who was already looking like he regretted the whole thing. They signed the papers. Hayes gave them a certificate. They left, sections outside. Clay Hendricks was waiting. He had 6 men with him. They were standing in the street blocking the way. Jacob's hand moved to his gun, but before he could draw, Ayanna stepped forward. She walked down the church steps and stood in the street facing Clay. She spoke in clear English. "I am his wife now. Legal. You have no claim." Reporter's Clay's face twisted. "You think a piece of paper changes what you are?" "Reporter, it changes what you can do," she said. Her voice was calm. "You cannot touch me now. The law protects me." "Sections, the law," Clay spat. "The law is what we say it is." Sections. Jacob came down the steps. He stood beside Ayanna. "The law says she's my wife. That makes her a citizen. You got a problem with that, you take it up with the territorial court. But you lay one hand on her, and I'll kill you. That's a promise." Sections. The crowd had gathered. People were watching from windows and doorways. Sheriff Garrett pushed through. "That's enough," he said. "Jacob's right. She's his wife now. That's legal and binding. You got no cause to harass them." He looked at Clay. "You and your boys move along." Sections. Clay stared at Jacob, then at Ayanna. Then he turned and walked away. His men followed. The crowd slowly dispersed. Garrett tipped his hat to Jacob. "Congratulations," he said. He did not sound entirely happy about it, but he said it. On sections, Jacob and Ayanna rode home. When they reached the ranch, Jacob helped her down from her horse. She stood in front of him. The afternoon sun was warm. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. "We're married now," he said. "Parpararver." She nodded. "Married. Parpararver. That means this is your home, not just a place you're staying. Your home." Mararer. She looked at the house, at the barn and the corral and the garden she had planted. Then she looked at him. "Our home," she said. Parvari smiled. "Our home." Parvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvarvar It was soft and brief, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through together. When she pulled back, she smiled. "I stay," she said. "Parberarworm." "You stay," he agreed. Parbermer. That night they sat on the porch as the sun set. The sky was streaked with red and gold, and Buck lay between them. Ayanna was grinding herbs with her stone. Jacob was mending a bridle. The silence was comfortable, full. After a while, she set down her work and looked at him. "Jacob," she said. Parfour he looked up, and she pointed at the empty room, the one with the cradle. "We make that room live again?" Parakrar. He understood what she was asking. His throat tightened. "Maybe," he said. "Someday." Parakrar. She nodded. "Someday." The seasons turned. Summer faded into fall. The garden Ayanna had planted yielded herbs and vegetables. She dried them and stored them for winter. She made medicines that she traded in town for fabric and tools. People were wary at first, but when a child fell sick and the doctor could not help, the mother came to Ayanna. Ayanna healed the child. After that, more people came. Quietly. At night. They did not want to be seen, but they needed her skills. She helped them all. Sections Jacob worked the ranch. Ayanna worked beside him. She could ride as well as any man. She could rope and brand and mend fence. She learned English quickly, and he learned more of her language. They talked in the evenings. She told him about her people, about the village where she had grown up, about the sickness that had killed her family and left her alone, about the long journey that had brought her to this land. He told her about Sarah, about the grief that had hollowed him out, about the years of silence. She listened to all of it. She did not try to fix it. She just listened. Parprur winter came. The first snow fell in November. They sat by the fire and she sang songs from her childhood. He played the guitar he had not touched in 4 years. The notes were rusty, but they came back. Buck slept at their feet. The house was warm, full of life, full of love. Sections one night in January, she took his hand and placed it on her belly. He looked at her. She smiled. "Someday is now," she said. Paridafar. He stared at her. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her. She held him back. Outside the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside they were warm. Pedro. The child was born in the spring. A girl. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's strong hands. They named her Sarah Ayanna, a bridge between 2 worlds. 2 griefs healed, 2 lives made whole. Pati Jacob Marsh had been a man carved hollow by loss. A man who had stopped living and started merely surviving. Then a woman had arrived in his world. A woman the frontier had tried to destroy. A woman who had saved his life with a bone knife and her own 2 hands. She had brought him back from the dead. Not with words, not with grand gestures, but with presence, with patience, with the slow accumulation of trust and work and beauty introduced into empty spaces. Reprotrophy. He never forgot the moment she cut the bullet from his side. Never forgot the steady certainty of her hands. Never forgot the way she had looked at him in that canyon and chosen to trust him. He carried the carved hawk she had made him in his pocket every day. A reminder, a talisman, a promise that dead things could live again if someone cared enough to tend them. Far years later, when people asked how they met, He would say she saved his life, and Ayana would smile and say he saved hers, and they would both be right. Par revoir. Thank you for listening to this story. And sometimes the quietest acts of courage, a hand extended, a choice to stay, a life tended back to wholeness, are the ones that change everything. If this story moved you, we'd be grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling these stories. What would you have done in Jacob's place? Would you have had the courage to stand against the world for someone who couldn't speak your language? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one.